and autism, a topic which is highly relevant in the monastic context because there's a high degree of neurodiversity in pretty much every monastery I've been in so far. So let's go. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. I'd like to start with a few definitions. What is autism? Autism is often called a pervasive developmental disorder, which is not a very helpful description. It doesn't mean anything to most people. It's a neurological condition. It's a hardware problem, so to speak. The central nervous system of a person who's autistic is wired differently from other people who, by comparison, are called neurotypical. So that's an ordinary person who doesn't experience any problems in daily life. The pervasive bit of autism means that autism affects every part of one's life. But personally, consider myself to be autistic. I diagnosed myself with Asperger's syndrome almost 20 years ago when I started as an anagarika in the Amaravati and Chithurst Sangha. And since then, since I found out what autism is about, I keep encountering neurodivergent people who are autistic or have ADHD or any other peculiarities wherever I look. And there's not a lot of material. It's not being talked about enough in the monastic context in Buddhism, and I'd like to fill this gap a little bit. Autism manifests very differently in individuals. No two autistic people are alike. Everyone has a very individual profile of symptoms. What's probably the most common denominator is a hypersensitivity to sensual impingement, sensual input via the eyes, the ears, all the sense doors. Noises are too loud, smells are too smelly, lights are too bright. Usually that's the biggest suffering autistic people experience is sensual overload. The nervous system gets overloaded with too much sense input. Other common symptoms of autistic people include not being able to read tones of voice or facial expressions, not being able to understand figures of speech, proverbs, taking things literally. If you tell them you're putting the cart before the horse, they will wonder what you're talking about because there's neither a cart nor a horse to be seen. On the positive side, autistic people can be very meticulous or exceptionally intelligent, systematic, and have great technical aptitude, but may at the same time be struggling on the social level. Small talk is often a problem. Maintaining a normal conversation is often a struggle, and all these things, when there are enough of these symptoms coming together, and a person can be considered autistic as opposed to neurotypical, and one's daily life becomes quite exhausting and at times even overwhelming, because the brain constantly has to work on overdrive to compensate for all these little problems in daily life. It takes energy to maintain a normal appearance. Autism, even though only recently a lot more has been written in the media and it has become much more prominent in daily life, is not an entirely new phenomenon. Even in the Suttas, when you look at it, you find characters who have a lot of autistic characteristics. And this is the point where I would like to start. I would like to introduce to you to Mahakachana, who is one of the foremost disciples of the Lord Buddha in the category of being able to explain a short exposition at great length. But even though he had this quality, every time someone came and asked him to do it, he was quite reluctant at first. And he was a bit of a loner. I will show you some excerpts of the book by Helmut Hecker and Nyanaponika Thera, Great Disciples of the Lord Buddha, and there's a whole chapter on Mahakachana. Let's take a look at that. So they write, we do not find indications that Mahakachana entered into close friendships with the other leading monks, as for instance Sariputta, Mahamoggallana, and Ananda did. He seems to be one who generally lived aloof, though he did not place a strict emphasis on seclusion. He was ready to assume teaching duties on request, but he always appears in the suttas in the role of expositor and elucidator of the Dhamma to others. We do not see him engage in person-to-person dialogues with other monks, neither do we see him address inquiries to the Buddha. His absence is conspicuous in the Mahagosinga Sutta, wherein the other outstanding disciples gather on a full moon night to discuss the ideal bhikkhu who could illuminate the forest. Surely, however, if Mahakachana had been present on that occasion, he would have described such a monk as one skilled in the detailed exposition of brief sayings. On one occasion, when Mahakachana visited the Buddha, he received special homage from Sakka, the king of the gods. The Lord was sitting surrounded by a company of great disciples. Because Mahakachana regularly used to visit the Buddha in order to hear the Dhamma, coming even from a long distance, the other elders would always reserve a seat for him in case he would unexpectedly turn up. Taken together, all his discourses have a uniform and distinctive flavor that reveal the qualities of the mind from which they sprang. They are thorough, balanced, careful and cautious, substantial in content, meticulous in expression, incisive, well-conceived, and well-rounded. They are also, admittedly, a little dry, unemotional and unsentimental, and bare of the rhetorical devices utilized by other renowned exponents of the Dhamma. We find in them no similes, parables, or stories. Their language is plain, but impeccably precise. I think that's a great example of an elder who might well have been autistic, and I think we should make him the unofficial patron of autistic monastics. He's definitely a great source of inspiration for me, and his Dhamma talks are always referring to the sense doors. And this is, for me, another indicator that Mahakachana may have been struggling in this field, just like I'm struggling and many other autistic people are struggling nowadays. For instance, there's a the Bhaddekarata Sutta that appears 4 times in the Majjhima Nikaya, and 3 of these suttas explain things by way of the 5 khandhas. But Mahakachana, when he is asked about the verse the Buddha uses in the Bhaddekarata Sutta, he takes a different path again, through the 5 senses. And I'll show you this passage from that sutta now. So some monks come to Mahakachana after they have heard the Lord Buddha give a short exposition, a stanza which they couldn't quite understand and needed further explanations. So then they knocked on Mahakachana's door, and Mahakachana was at first reluctant, responding like this: "Friends, it is as though a man needing hardwood thought that hardwood should be sought for among the branches and leaves of the great tree, standing possessed of hardwood, after he had passed over the root and the trunk. And so it is with you, venerable sirs, that you think I should be asked about the meaning of this after you passed the Blessed One by, when you were face to face with the teacher. That was the time when you should have asked the Blessed One the meaning. As he told you, so you should have remembered it." So the monks asking, they are saying, well, yeah, you may have a point, but could you please explain it to us anyway? And so after a bit of hesitation, slightly reluctant, Mahakachana agrees to explain what the Lord Buddha meant by this short verse. "I understand the detailed meaning to be as follows. How, friends, does one revive the past? One's consciousness becomes bound up with desire and lust, their thinking. My I was thus in the past, and forms were thus. Because one's consciousness is bound up with desire and lust, one delights in that. When one delights in that, one revives the past. One's consciousness becomes bound up with desire and lust, their thinking. My ear was thus in the past, and sounds were thus. My nose and odors, my tongue and flavors, my body and tangibles. My mind was thus in the past, and mind objects were thus. Because one's consciousness is bound up with desire and lust, one delights in that. When one delights in that, one revives the past. That is how one revives the past." So this is how Mahakachana uses the 5 sense doors and the mind and Dhamma as the 6 to explain what the Lord Buddha is explaining in short verses. And this happens several times across the suttas. Another prominent example is Majjhima Nikaya number 18, the Honeyball Sutta, where again the Buddha makes a short cryptic statement and then disappears into his kutis, leaving his monks to wonder what on earth this verse is about. And again, they go to Mahakachana, knock on the door, and after some hesitation, Mahakachana gives a an exposition going through the six senses. There's a modern or more contemporary monk who's died a few years ago, Luang Pu Wen Suchino. He was up in Thailand near Chiang Mai, and he had a very similar behavior to Mahakachana. He would also stay away from the other great disciples of Luang Por Man, who were mainly based in the northeast, while Luang Por Wen kept staying in the north. And again, he wouldn't come out to give extended Dhamma talks. You really had to go to his kuti and almost kick the door in to get a response. And even then, Luang Por Wen was reluctant to talk. And when he did, and he did so, I think there are about 27 of his Dhamma talks recorded and translated into English. He responded by explaining the Dhamma in terms of the six sense bases. So these can be our great heroes, our role models to look up to, and yes, be inspired by and say autism is no hindrance on the way to becoming enlightened. It may even be an advantage. But in daily life in the monastery, there's still not enough awareness around what autism is and in which way autistic people differ from others. And I personally have had a few quite painful, uninspiring, annoying discussions with senior monks when I was trying to explain sensual overload and verbal overload. I sometimes just have to tune out and use earplugs when a person is talking for a too long time and too fast. It just becomes painful. And I don't know if you know what it looks like when an autistic person goes into fully blown meltdown or becomes overloaded. Again, there's a classic example which I'm going to show you. It's Edvard Munch's The Scream. This is, from my point of view, this is a classic meltdown situation. The person screaming while covering its ear. His is probably a man, his ears at the same time, and the whole world around him in sort of wobbly lines and bright colors. It's a dramatic situation, and it's experienced in quite a dramatic way, I think, by most autistic people, because it's really the nervous system being overloaded and in dire need of some seclusion and peace and quiet. Unfortunately, often people don't understand this need for seclusion and either mistake a meltdown for bad behavior or rush forward and try to help this person by engaging with the person instead of taking a step back and letting the person flee the scene or leave the person in peace, or just offer maybe a tactile object like a blanket to hug and guide the person away from the source of that caused the sensual overload in the first place. In the Suttas, there's the often quoted, quite well-known sutta, the dart, that deals with painful feeling and how we add a second painful feeling by adding mental dukkha to the physical dukkha. And I would like to show you a quote from that and then explain the relevance it has for autistic people. So that's in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Vedana Samyutta number 36 and the sixth sutta, the dart. Bhikkhus, when the uninstructed worldling is being contacted by a painful feeling, he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. He feels two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. Suppose they were to strike a man with a dart, and then they would strike him immediately afterwards with a second dart, so that the man would feel a feeling caused by two darts. So too, when the uninstructed worldling is being contacted by a painful feeling, he feels two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. Bhikkhus, when the instructed noble disciple is contacted by a painful feeling, he does not sorrow, grieve, or lament. He does not weep, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. He feels one feeling, a bodily one, not a mental one. Suppose they were to strike a man with a dart, but they would not strike him immediately afterwards with a second dart, so that the man would feel a feeling caused by one dart only. So too, when the instructed noble disciple is contacted by a painful feeling, he feels one feeling, a bodily one, not a mental one. Of course, pretty much all of us are still what the Buddha would call an uninstructed, ordinary disciple. We haven't reached the level of the non-returner, the anagami yet, who has this complete separation from body and mind, just rests in knowing this is not me, this is not mine, but can observe bodily feelings at all times as something that's just happening, but it doesn't get entangled with these feelings and manages to keep the distance. And whenever I talk to senior ajahns explaining how I'm struggling with sensory overload, I usually get a lecture telling me how I'm averse and how I'm unnecessarily adding to my suffering with mental aversion and all kinds of other negative reactions. And this has happened so many times that I'm over time, anger and frustration over this has built up because I feel unseen and misunderstood and misjudged, and it's totally unhelpful. Of course, even as an autistic people, I'm adding mental dukkha, the second dart, because I'm not an anagami. So I'm doing that just like everybody else. But the point is, and this is where autistic people really differ from neurotypical people, and this is what the Kruba Ajahns and the other Ajahns here in the West don't understand. Because autism is a neurological conditions, we are hit by different physical darts. It's neurological, it's physical. It's not a mental, psychological problem. So the sensory overload is a physical problem. We are hit by different darts that cause us physical suffering. And when we react by trying to avoid the situation or try to negotiate exemptions, like, do I really have to join in this activity? I can't stand it. Then it's totally unhelpful to be gaslit and told, well, this is just your aversion and you need to work with that. And this is a point I want to make really clear to everyone who's listening today. Neurodivergent people, not only autistic, but I think people who are struggling with ADHD or other related conditions, are affected by other physical darts and physical impingement in a way outsiders cannot, shouldn't judge, because they cannot fully appreciate. They are not this person. And bear in mind, you don't know what we experience. So don't judge us based on your experience, but believe us when we try to explain what's going on for us. This is a very important point I think everybody needs to understand when dealing with neurodivergent people. Don't assume that your experience is the same as everyone else's. And this is also a bit of a paradox, because one of the symptoms of autism that I forgot to mention earlier on is autistic people often struggle with putting themselves into other people's shoes, understanding what another person is experiencing right now, like what suffering they experience or how they are affected by a particular situation. But in my monastic daily life, in reality, I often find myself in a situation that I have to accommodate neurotypical people. I have to put myself in their shoes to explain, to understand why they react to me as an autistic person in this way. And then I have to go out of my way to accommodate them and explain to them how they should actually be accommodating me. And I can tell you, over the years, that's been draining my resources. So it's no wonder that autistic people sometimes need more time to withdraw, be by themselves, or need an extra hour of sleep just to recharge their batteries, especially after big festival days, when it's highly likely to become peopled out after you're in crowds on a big Vesak day, and you start early with a patimokkha, then it's a crowded breakfast and a long Pindapad line, a Dhamma talk, a ritual with paritas, and then in the evening you have to do a circumambulation after the evening meditation. And so by 10 p.m. I'm done. I'm not ready and prepared to continue until midnight, because I just flee the scene and know there's no point in me carrying on this. And I don't have to. I just don't want to justify myself every time I'm doing this. I would like, to contribute to creating greater understanding what it's like for autistic and other neurodivergent people to live the holy life, and lead one's life in the monastic context. Yes, and maybe to give some guidance on how to work with one's little quirks and individual problems. And even neurotypical people may have some struggling in particular areas. So I think it's something that's relevant for everyone. And again, the Lord Buddha provided guidance in 7 ways in the Sabbasava Sutta, which is all the taints, Majjhima Nikaya number 2. And I will also show you a small summary of that, and we can go through that list. So it starts with bhikkhus. I say that the destruction of the taints, and the taints, the asavas, are the deep-rooted defilements in the heart of people, is for one who knows and sees, not for one who does not know and see. Who knows and sees what? Wise attention and unwise attention. When one attends unwisely, unarisen taints arise and arisen taints increase. When one attends wisely, unarisen taints do not arise and arisen taints are abandoned. So in this context, I think we can substitute the word taints for symptoms and look at the 7 ways the Lord Buddha recommends to use wise attention and avoid unwise attention regarding one's symptoms and dealing with them in 7 different ways. So, bhikkhus, there are symptoms that should be abandoned by seeing. In the sutta itself, it refers to the noble truth. They should be abandoned by restraining. In the suttas, the 6 senses, restraining the 6 senses, should be abandoned by using. In the sutta, the 4 requisites, should be abandoned by enduring. In the sutta, unavoidable external and physical phenomena like hunger and thirst or creeping, crawling things, heat and cold, wind, should be abandoned by avoiding unnecessary external dangers like wild animals or dangerous cliffs, should be abandoned by removing, such as unskillful thoughts of ill will, sensual pleasure, and what's the third one? Violent thoughts, about thoughts of harming others, should be abandoned by developing, which in the suttas is the 7 factors of enlightenment. And these 7 strategies can also be applied to the different symptoms autistic people experience. For instance, the seeing part could be being well informed about autism, what symptoms it has, and how to deal with it in a skillful way. Just this is the knowledge part, and the part of instructing others about what autism is all about. Restraining, yes, it is the 6 senses and one's exposure to sensory impingement, and a useful tool in doing that is using sunglasses when the lights are too bright, or always having earplugs at hand in case one gets sensory overload through too much noise and too much background noise in particular, which can be very challenging for autistic people when they can't filter between the birds singing in the background and the noise from a fan or a gas truck delivering new gas and having a conversation with a person. So on that level, one has to be really careful to restrain one's senses and take good care of not becoming overloaded. abandoning by using, yes, again, that could be just having earplugs at hand or sunglasses, and developing other useful workarounds, strategies, using strategies to help compensate one's struggles in daily life. The symptoms to be abandoned by enduring, well, sometimes we just have to sit through ceremonies or have to endure autism unfriendly situations, like screaming children while sitting on a bus or a train, our various monastic duties. And in this case, yes, one just has to develop one's patient endurance and do one's best in coping with it, and preparing for these situations by getting enough sleep and monitoring one's caffeine levels and one's blood sugar levels to be as fit and readily prepared for unpleasant, unavoidable situations as possible. On the other hand, when there are a situation that can be avoided, I think one should be allowed to do so, especially if you're able to explain it to others, your sisters in the holy life, beforehand. Excuse me. That you may need a special allowance because certain situations are simply impossible for you to cope with or extremely challenging. In my case, for instance, before I go to a work meeting, I sometimes indicate to the work nun that I'm having a bad day and that I would prefer to work by myself. On other days, I say, well, that's no problem for me to go out with a group and do a simple task that needs little instructions, like take a group of lay people to go leaf raking. But what's always a challenge for me, and a situation I like to avoid, is to go into an unclear situation where I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with a group of people who also don't know what they are doing, and then try to figure it out together. In these situations, it's either let me figure it out by myself, or I stay out of the situations. But the combination of something I don't feel confident about, I'm not on top of, with other people I have to interact with, is usually quite toxic, actually quite toxic for me, and can easily and quickly lead to a meltdown. Yes, symptoms to be abandoned by removing. Autistic people often experience so-called comorbidities, being the odd one out, the person who's struggling when everybody's having a great time, is a bad feeling and often results in anxiety and in depression. When you repeatedly cannot perform in the way that's expected of you, and especially when you're still undiagnosed and don't know what's wrong with you, what's the matter with you, it's easy to feel bad about oneself, and also judge oneself quite harshly. And so abandoning by removing, yes, again, unskillful thoughts, like it's an exercise in developing loving kindness for oneself, and noticing when thoughts of anxiety arise, or thoughts of trail off into depressive thoughts, like why I will never ever get things right, or why does this always happen to me, and then just try to take a step back and restore helpful thoughts, such as, I went into the situation, I did my best, I was coping for so and so long, and even though I may not have gone all the way, I did my best, and today is another day, and next time I can and I will be able to communicate better and make my maybe my needs will be met by making my needs known, and so one can learn to talk to oneself in a much more helpful and uplifting way. And finally, symptoms that should be abandoned by developing, again, that's a skillful method of reviewing situations with mindfulness, or even upholding mindfulness in the situation itself, noticing one's skillful or unskillful reactions, one's challenges, and then later, when there's time and space, take that to the cushion and reflect on it, doing Dhamma Vicaya, reflecting on the situation that happened and looking for the root of one's suffering, looking for alternatives. How could it have been handled in a more skillful way? And by finding skillful ways and developing them, energy arises, and pity, and a sense of calm and equanimity, that one is on the right path and going in the right direction, even though one's daily life may at times still feel pretty challenging. So this is as much as I would like to say about the Saleka Sutta. I keep returning to this sutta because it's really helpful to look what's the right tool in this particular situation. Which direction should I head? Should I go for patient endurance because the situation is unavoidable, or should I just say, I'm sorry, this is really my limit. I can't cope with that. I can't handle this. Please find another person who doesn't have this problem. I'm happy to be helpful in any other way. And usually, especially when I'm in a bigger monastery, there's always something autistic friendly to do. I can really contribute and maybe even outperform other people by being systematic and a bit nerdy. Yes, and to round this session up, maybe a short summary. So if you're neurotypical and you notice someone is autistic, or they actively tell you they are, or they are neurodivergent in some other way, how can you respond and how can you support these people? And I think the most important bit for me is believe them. When someone opens up and tries to explain what's going on for them, don't say to them something, that doesn't strike me as particularly autistic. Everyone has problems like that. I have problems like that. It's not helpful. It's like you're saying I'm gay and someone else says, well, just wait and see, you haven't met the right woman yet. It's like, for me, that's the end of the conversation, because if you don't want to listen to me and if you don't believe me, I don't have any time for you. So please don't try to listen, ask questions, invite them to share some more, and and keep observing and see how it manifests for them in their daily life. And maybe one day when they are really struggling and have a bad day, the symptoms will become quite conspicuous, and then you see that we are not making it up. I often explain to other people in a situation when I'm on top of it, when my energies are good and I'm calm and able to communicate like an adult. I'm autistic and sometimes I'm struggling with these things and people just don't believe me. But then the shock comes when sometimes, my energies are low and suddenly I switch from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, and then they don't know what's going on. And so, believe us, that's the most important point. And also, when you notice an autistic person being overwhelmed and struggling, don't assume that what's helpful for you in a situation like that might be helpful for them. Physical contact or hugs or helping them by being close to them and working together with them might actually be quite counterproductive. They might need to be left alone. They might need to be allowed to withdraw, just, go to the toilet, lock themselves in the toilet for 10 minutes, or they might just need earplugs, or what sometimes helps to calm me down, a bunch of blankets to hug, so that sort of the stress that builds up in the nervous system, I sort of can sort of put it out take it out of the body into the blankets. Actually, I've got blankets here, so I'll give you a demonstration, sort of like a good firm hug with a blanket, so that all the stress building up in the nervous system and the heart evaporates and can be sort of passed on into the blankets. So this is my coming out here. I'm a blanket hugger. And what else? Yes, and generally in Buddhist monasteries, and I've seen many people coming and going with quite obvious symptoms of autism and other neurodiversity. For us, a monastery is a haven because usually there is less sensory impingement than in the outside world. And the monastic routine, which is quite repetitive and well-structured, is also a big blessing. So many neurodivergent people actually experience great relief when they come to a monastery and appreciate the atmosphere, while those who enter monastery with psychological problems often experience an increase in their symptoms because of the routine, and because there's less opportunity to go into other activities and to distract oneself from one's symptoms. People who have neurological dukkha more than psychological dukkha initially experience great relief, because their psychological comorbidities like the overwhelm and the anxiety becomes less, and the environment is more conducive for the neurological makeup. But long term, the longer you stay in the monastery, the more you get involved. Even monasteries can be quite challenging for autistic and other neurodivergent people. So it would be nice if more diversity would be actively encouraged and allowed in a Buddhist monastery, so that the schedule does not have to be the same for everyone at the same time. So if somebody repeatedly struggles with the noise of morning chanting or circumambulations, because it's too much at the same time, then it would be really helpful to let the person off the hook, and then we can all really benefit from being in a monastery together and learn from each other. Yes, I think that's how I would like to end this talk. Thank you for listening, Ewang.